Hi guys, and welcome back to day 4 of Inktober. And today I wanted to make sure that I was really in love with the sketch before I started inking. And I talked about that yesterday a little bit, where I felt like I was pressuring myself to get out a good sketch really fast so that I can move straight on to inking. And obviously that did not turn out the same way that I would have liked it to. And the biggest issue was that I was putting too much pressure on myself to draw a sketch immediately at that moment that was something that I really loved. So for today I actually drew the sketch for this last night. So this was just a wind down sketch of the evening when I was sitting there drawing, and it was something that I was interested in, so I developed it more and more, and I was able to put more ideas into it and to get it developed to the place that I wanted it to, so that when it came time to ink it today, I was very happy with the sketch. I had figured out a lot of the issues early on in the sketch rather than moving on from a bad sketch or a sketch that had some of the problems still there. So yeah, today went a lot smoother. I think it definitely helped to separate the two so that the sketching and the inking were not happening in the same span of time where I had to rush from one to the next. So that was really helpful. But yeah, today I decided that I wanted to kind of go back to how I used to do most of my pieces. And this is really actually kind of a throwback to when I did artwork before I even started into digital at all. I would do ink drawings like this, and it was amazing. I loved working with pens like this, and I kind of had fallen out of that a little bit because the precision that I was wanting to get out of the pens was something that I was able to replace in digital eventually once I got into that. But it was just really fun to be able to get back into the same style of inking that I used to do. And today I'm using 3 different sizes of the Micron pens and some Bristol board, and I'll link that down below in my description box if you wanted to look at exactly what I was using. Oh, and I also end up using a black Copic marker to fill in some of the detail at the bottom of her dress. And yeah, I think in the future of Inktober, as I'm working on this, to get a similar effect like this where I was filling something in with ink, I don't think I'm going to use the Copic marker again. The biggest issue was just it was not nearly as opaque, and I wanted something that was really black, and this just was not cutting it, especially when I was covering up some of the line work, and you could very clearly see the line work standing out through the Copic marker. So yeah, in the future I'll make sure to use a better ink for that. I actually got a new bottle of ink for Inktober because I spilled my last one, and I've gone through several bottles of this. I think it's Speedball Super Black is what I usually like to do, and that's what I bought. But when I bought it home and I opened up the box, it was actually a totally different ink. Well, it was still Speedball, but it was a silver ink, so I had to take that one back, and I actually ended up getting the Microns while I was there. So in a way it was pretty good because I'm glad I could use the Microns. I'd rather have used those for this piece than a brush and ink, because there's no getting past how incredibly precise you can get with Micron pens like this, and I really love that. I love the ability to be really sharp and clean and know exactly where the line's going to go when I'm putting it down. So this is by far my favorite type of pen to use when I'm doing any sort of inking. And the process that I used today is I actually went straight on with my light board. So how I used to do inking is I would take my light board and I would take my sketch, and then I would very painstakingly transfer that onto my final board with pencil, and I try to be really light and careful and only put lines where I thought it needed to be, rather than the way that the sketch is or the way that the line work. I usually end up adding details. So when I used to do it that way, it usually really sterilized the expression that I had in the sketch, and by the time I got to the inking it just felt really flat, and I was feeling like I was kind of fighting against what was there. And then it just kind of came to me that I didn't really need to transfer it on first before I started inking it. I could just ink it while it was still on the light box, and that just works so much better for me. I much prefer being able to see clearly the whole sketch, the really loose lines that I have, because as I'm inking I like to include stuff like that. Or if I'm making it much more precise and cleaned up, which is kind of the point of inking, I can still take that energy to it and include that in certain details that reference the shape that I had in the sketch. So overall this is just a lot more pleasant of an experience, and it doesn't take as much time as, you know, carefully tracing it and then tracing it again in ink. So this way it just works way better for me, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. There are a few details though that, since this was a sketch that was still in my sketchbook and I did not want to tear it out just for this because it was just almost right, is that that spiral kind of got in the way when I got towards the top of her head. So her head and her eyebrow is just like this tiny little detail that I did not want to mess up, and I couldn't really quite get at it because of the spiral. So I left that until after I had gotten everything mapped out and I had inked in where everything was, and then I untaped it, and then I was able to go in and add her eyebrow and add a lot more details to the top of her hair. And that's just a good point where I can start beefing up some of the lines and give it a lot more heft to it where I want it to be, and connect lines a little bit better and add new details and stuff like that. So yeah, and also during the sketch I had drawn her hand in a way that was just at a weird angle. It looked kind of strained. But it was just really easy to fix on this, because what I did was I just drew her arm, because I had already figured that her arm was where I wanted it to be. I just wanted her arm, or her hand itself, to be rotated just a little bit so it felt a little bit more natural. So I just untaped the piece of paper and then shifted it around and pivoted it right at that wrist, and then I just inked on top of that, and it worked really pretty seamlessly. I cannot recommend enough using a light box, because light boxes they save so much time when it comes to doing pieces like this where it's inked like that. But I noticed there are a lot of things that I have to be a lot more aware of when I'm working traditionally for my inking as opposed to digital, and that's pretty obvious. I mean, when you're doing digital, you can undo pretty much anything, but when it's traditional, it's kind of there. But I've noticed that when I am working traditionally, I can slip up and put in these tangents all the time, and that drives me insane. And tangents, if you don't know, it's where two shapes or lines will intersect in a way that it looks like they're kind of like becoming one line, and it really takes away from the realism of it, where you look at it and you're like, oh, is that neck merging with the hair? Because it looks really weird. And that's kind of exactly what happened right at the hair that's curling around by her neck. It like ends right where her neck would end. And I think that just when I'm working digitally, I put lines down and then I see how it looks, and then I change it, and I'm able to see that it is a tangent, and I move it after that, but I don't really think about it before I try to put things down first and then make it work for me. But when I'm working digital, or I mean when I'm working traditional, I obviously have to definitely be thinking about that beforehand. And I think that's just one of those issues that always comes up, is I'm trying to be very thoughtful about each stroke that I'm taking and making sure that I'm putting them in the correct order, and then I'm not drawing over anything. So I am trying to be very aware of how it fits in with the rest of it, but that is one thing that I notice I slip up on a lot, or at least a lot more so than in other places, is these tangents. And also the things that I really want to focus on when I'm doing traditional, because I can't take things back, is I want to make sure that the details are all not representing, but they're all mirroring each other. And what I mean by that is, for her hair, I wanted to make sure that all the locks ended in the same kind of tapered twist to it, so there weren't any that were standing out as being a different style or a different way that it finished off. And also, when I decided to add more of this like blotchy black, there we go, that was hard to say, blotchy black on the bottom of her dress, and the way that it's kind of like seeping up, when I put that element of like the little like dots and the way that it was kind of like seeping around, it was very different to the way that I had the black on her hands. And on her hands earlier, I'd put it in kind of a cross-hatching effect. So once I added the black at the bottom of her skirt, I needed to go back up to her hands and make sure that they both had that same look to it, rather than having one be the odd one out, and it looked really weird. And luckily that one was actually a pretty easy fix, so I just made sure that they both were mirroring each other stylistically as far as how I was representing that black shape. But that is it for today's Inktober. I actually ended up trimming a little bit off the edges. It just frames her a little bit better, and the composition works a little more better this way, the way I wanted it to. But Yeah, I feel like this piece in particular just looks so much better in real life than it does in any of the photographs I could take of it. And I think that's kind of a trend with a lot of, at least my traditional work, is I always think it looks better in person, but I think that's just kind of the thing about original artwork, is that it does look good when you're right there looking at it, and that's kind of the beauty of it, and that's what makes it so amazing. But yeah, I really loved working on this really precise line work. I loved it. It really did make me happy working on it. So it was a lot better of a process, I think, than, and I'm starting to get into the rhythm of how I like to work on my Inktobers and how to make sure that I am enjoying and getting the most out of it. But yeah, that is pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you at my next Inktober. And also, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you tomorrow.